We are moving on in our series, The People in the Bible, and I hope you are learning. I hope you're gaining from this. Today we are going to take a little turn in the way these stories have been going because we are looking at the life of Deborah. And I say a little turn because there's one particular difference you might have noticed about this person other than the people we've been talking about so far. It should be pretty obvious. She is a woman. It's kind of Ladies' Day, okay, in the story we're looking at today. And that's really important because it shows us that God does not look at women as second-class citizens. He never did. And if anybody tells you that's hogwash, okay? That's a theological term for that. It's hogwash. Women are not second-class citizens. He uses women. He uses men. Today we are looking at one of the women that he used, and he used her in a very powerful way. It was pretty much a man's world back there. So it stands out that this particular champion of Israel was a woman. And we have just wandered into the book of Judges on our journey through the people in the Bible. And the book of Judges is named after the people that God raised up to deliver Israel from their oppressors again and again. And they were called judges. You could also call them champions. And this one we're looking at happens to be a woman, and her name is Deborah. Now let's get right into our passage this morning. And where it says passage in your journal, you can write Judges chapter 4, verses 1 through 24. So I'm going to be reading quite a few verses today, and it even has some really exciting names in it, so I hope you'll be praying for me as I read this. But we are in Judges chapter 4. I'm going to read the whole chapter, verse 1 through 24. And if you want to get the whole context of Deborah, like I've been giving you that every week, just write down chapter 5. Chapter 5, it's really unique, is a song about chapter 4. So you'll just get it twice. There's not a whole lot said about Deborah, but it is here in these two chapters. So chapter 4, verses 1 through 24, and here we go. The sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died, and the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor, and the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived, and here goes one of those names, Harosheth Hagoyim. The sons of Israel cried to the Lord, for he had 900 iron chariots, and he oppressed the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit at the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. Now she sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, Behold, the Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, Go and march to Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and from the sons of Zebulun. I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand. Then Barak said to her, If you will go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. She said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the honor shall not be yours on the journey which you are about to take, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali together to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up with him. Deborah also went up with him. Now Heber the Kenite had separated himself from the Kenites, from the sons of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and pitched his tent as far away as the oaks of Zaanaim, which is near Kadesh. Then they told Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. Sisera called together all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the people who were with him from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. Deborah said to Barak, Arise, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Behold, the Lord has gone out before you. So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. The Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not even one was left. Now Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was a peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera, and she said to him, "Turn aside, my master, and turn to me. Do not be afraid." And he turned aside to her into her tent, and she covered him with a rug. He said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." So she opened a bottle of milk and gave him a drink. Then she covered him. He said to her, "Stand in the doorway of the tent, and it shall be if anyone comes to and inquires of you and says, 'Is there anyone here?' then you shall say no." But Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and seized a hammer in her hand and went secretly to him and drove the peg into his temple. And it went through into the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted, so he died. And behold, Barak pursued Sisera. Jael came out to meet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." And he entered with her, and behold, Sisera was lying dead with the tent peg in his temple. So God subdued on that day Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the sons of Israel. The hand of the sons of Israel pressed heavier and heavier upon Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaan. Quite a story there, isn't it? Yeah, it's quite a passage there. Now today I said is a little bit different because the main person is a woman. It is also a little different because it's not really the story of one person. As we just read through that, you could probably see it is the story of three people whom God chooses to use together to make this happen. Number one is Deborah. We've already talked about her. Number two is Barak. And number three is Jael. All three are integral to this story. Each one is portrayed briefly in achieving God's purpose, but each one is integral. The story doesn't happen without any one of them. And this story comes to us in slight contrast to what we saw in Caleb last week, because if you remember, Caleb demonstrated this unwavering trust in God to go out and do whatever God said to do without question. God said you take the hill country, we go to the hill country and we take the hill country. God said you take those giants, we go and we take those giants. It doesn't matter if I live, it doesn't matter if I die, we're going to do what God said. That was Caleb's faith that we saw last week. Excuse me. In the story of Deborah, God uses a reluctant leader and brings about his purposes in spite of him. See the difference there? Can you think of any other reluctant leaders God used to get his will done in the earth, especially in the stories we've covered so far? Anyone? I hear it rumbling out there. Moses. Yes, Moses. And the Bible is full of reluctant leaders like that God chooses and God uses even though they're reluctant. The book of Judges has more examples than this one too, and we will come across some of those as we go through. God uses reluctant people at some time, or let's get to our core theme and impact, because this is what it really is. God uses imperfect people with imperfect faith to fulfill his perfect plan. We can't all be Caleb, can we? God uses imperfect people with imperfect faith to fulfill his perfect plan. That is this story. That is what we will see fulfilled in this account. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, let's go back and let's talk about the time period and the context. And I'm going to spend a little time here because, for one, the narrative is short. For another, it's some exciting stuff if you're a nerd like me and you love history. We are somewhere around the year 1200 BC. roughly 200 years since Joshua, okay? 200 years since Joshua. We're in the year somewhere around 1200 BC. Something really big happened in the world around that time, around the whole known world at that time, around 1200 BC. In fact, if you look up, you go to Google and you search, you go to whichever AI engine you prefer, and you type in 1177 BC anywhere on the internet, you'll see what I mean. Big year, 1177 BC, the world entered a dark age. Like the dark ages, we look back and we see before the Renaissance in our European history, there was another period of time where the whole world slipped into a darkness of literacy and all these kind of things, of culture, of civilization, and the world kind of fell apart in 1177 BC. It's known as the Dark Ages of 1177. It's been primarily attributed to a specific group of people that caused this to happen. They left their homes in Anatolia. Guys, you can go ahead and put that map up there if everybody's done writing yet. And up in Anatolia, which is up at the top of that map, where we call it Turkey today. And it spread throughout the world, these people attacking other people groups and growing like a cancer in the world. They're called the Sea Peoples. I want you to say, because it sounds funny, but you can look it up later. Sea Peoples. Say that with me. The Sea Peoples. That's who came, and they started doing this. They came out of Anatolia, and they started moving around. They started attacking other people. They really came, what's surprising is because of that area they came from, they came with really the Greek culture, the Greek gods, the Greek forms of all this stuff. And so they were carrying this with them. They destroyed the Hittite Empire, which had struck fear into the hearts of the world. We talked about those guys over the past couple weeks with their iron weapon technology and their iron chariots. And they took the weapons that the Hittites had and made them their own. And now they were out there to conquer the world. And they were causing havoc everywhere. You can see on this map that they sailed south across the Mediterranean Sea and they attacked the Egyptians. This is where it starts getting really interesting here. The Egyptians, being the world power of the time, as we've talked about, they drove them off. They fought them off. They said, we can't land here. So the Sea Peoples sailed eastward and settled in the coastal lands of Canaan, which is Israel, which is where the children of Israel have just moved into. Now, because Israel had driven out so many people who lived in that area, there was a power vacuum. Them conquering the promised land created a power vacuum, and it was just right for these Sea Peoples to move in and to take root all along the coastland and begin spreading inland. And they merged with the people who were there, and they mixed their religions so that Zeus became, this is going to sound familiar, Zeus kind of became Baal, and Neptune became Dagon. We'll hear about him in the book of Judges. They moved in, they took over, and they mixed with the locals, and they brought their Greek-like religion and mixed it with the local religion. They eventually became known by a different name that would plague the children of Israel all through the Bible, and even today, the Philistines. That's where this got really interesting. We always hear about the Philistines. We think they're just people in Canaan. They're just these. They were actually the superior warriors. They're the ones with the technology. They're the ones who came in. They weren't the ones living there, and the children of Israel were trying to drive them out. The children of Israel settled the promised land, and now in come these Philistines, the Sea Peoples, with their boats, with their technology, with their religion, and they're trying to drive Israel out because they want the land. It just changes so much of what we thought about the Philistines. We always thought, well, they just had these cities and Israel was fighting. They were the far superior force. And Israel was a bunch of shepherds and farmers, and their land was being invaded by these people with higher technology and more weapons. And we know they came from up there, the Philistines, because we look at their pottery and it matches. It's the same. Changes our perspective on who they were, doesn't it? Makes some of these stories, when we hear about the Philistines, a little more interesting. Now, that's one of the big interesting things of this time period. The second thing I want to make clear on this time period is that we're entering into the time period of the Judges. I already said we're going into the book of the Judges, and that's the time period we're in. We won't go through the whole book of Judges. I'm going to take out some of these stories and cover them with you, because to me, the book of Judges is just so sad and disappointing, I can't hardly take it. It really is. It is a low point in Israel's existence. I want to share two passages with you right now that kind of summarize what the period of the Judges was like. So if you flip back one page to Judges chapter 2 in your Bible, I'm going to read you verses 7 through 11. And this shows how we got to this point. Starting at chapter 2, verse 7, this is what it tells us. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua. We talked about him 2 times ago. And all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen all the great work which the Lord had done for Israel. Then Joshua, the servant of the Lord, died at age 110. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres and in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. In other words, that generation died. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, did not know Yahweh, nor yet the work which he had done in Israel. And the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. This is the book of Judges. As things often go, Joshua died, and things that should not have been forgotten were lost. It took a few generations, but the things that happened under Moses and happened under Joshua as they came into the promised land became stories, and stories became legends, and legends became myths, and then people just didn't believe them anymore, and then people just didn't know them anymore. They were forgotten. And people stopped seeing the miracles of God. They weren't happening in their day, and they drifted away from God, and they drifted into these pagan religions of the area that had been introduced to them. People didn't even know the Lord anymore. That's the setting for the book of Joshua. And then this terrible cycle begins, and this cycle is the book of Judges. The people would forget God, and they would turn to the pagan gods, the Baals, like it said there. They would see what these Philistines had, these sea peoples, and they would want what they had, and they would start turning to them and their ways. And the people of Israel would fall into idolatry like that, and then God would punish them, usually by bringing in another army, like the Philistines or like someone else, like we read about Sisera here. Eventually, the people would remember where they had fallen from, and they would start crying out to God, and they would start repenting, so God would send him one of his deliverers, a judge, and these are the characters of the book, that would come and they would lead them out of bondage again, and he or she would lead them to freedom again. Then things would get good for a while. But every time it got good, every time Israel got comfortable, they fell back into the idolatry again. And the cycle just keeps going like this and going like this, and round and round and round they go through that whole cycle of forgetting God, going into bondage, being rescued, or repenting, being rescued, forgetting God, going into, and they just keep. That's why we're not doing the whole book of Judges, because that is the book of Judges. And that's exactly what verses 1 through 3 of our reading this morning told us about the story of Deborah, Barak, and Jael. It says the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. After Ehud, he was the last deliverer. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And the commander of his army was Sisera. So they had forgotten God, and they were put right back into bondage and oppression again. Now, for the second thing about the book of Judges I want you to see, turn with me to Judges 17, verse 6. This verse is so poignant to this whole thing that it is repeated verbatim in Judges 21, verse 25. You turn to either one of those, you're going to read these same words again. And this is what it says. This is the other condition of Israel in time of the Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. There wasn't a king yet. Every man did, what does it say? What was right in his own eyes. The root of the problem isn't that Israel didn't have a king, but that everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. There was no common morality. There should have been. God gave it to him. He wrote it in stone, It should have been. But everybody was just doing what they thought was right, or they felt was right. And when everybody does what they think is right, or what they feel is right, it's a mess. Look at our world today. Well, that might be true for you, but is it true for me? That might be right for you, but is it right for me? That might be what you should do, but is that what I should do? And then there's no absolute code of morality or understanding of God, and everybody goes and does their own thing, and everything turns into a mess, and that was Israel between those two things. In fact, if you read chapters 19 through 21 of Judges on your own, I would say don't read it with your children unless they're adults. You'll see how bad it got. And that is the setting the story of Deborah begins in. Here's the story of Deborah, Barak, and Jael. It's been about 20 years of oppression for Israel. It fell into because of this cycle they're going through. And there was a great city in Canaan, Hazor, which sadly Joshua had destroyed 200 years earlier when he was there. But now it is rebuilt, it is regrown, and the same pagans are in it again. So they have grown back in this time when Israel is not walking with God. And it calls the king Jabin, but that's actually more his title if you're reading this instead of his name, just like Pharaoh is not really Pharaoh's name. So he was the king of these Canaanites, and they had resurrected in that same place, built this great city, and this king, this Jabin, had hired a man to enforce his reign and to oppress Israel, this mercenary. His name was Sisera. He's the real bad guy of the story. Real bad guy. His name is not Canaanite, and his name is not Hebrew, which leads the historians to believe that he is either one of these sea peoples we talked about, or one of the leftover Hittites. That is who they think he was. He was a hired mercenary who came in to help out this Jabin in his oppression of Israel. Besides his foreign name, his choice of weapons gives us a clue. He had, what does it say there? How many? 900 iron chariots. We saw several weeks ago, the ones with the iron chariots were the Hittites. This was the biggest, these were like tanks. Nobody else had this. You had iron swords and iron chariots in the Bronze Age. You destroyed whatever you came across. And he had 900 of these, and he was hired by this Jabin to help oppress Israel. Who could stand in the way of 900 iron chariots? Not a bunch of shepherds and farmers. So you can see what Israel was up against at the start of this story. Verse 3 says, "Then the sons of Israel cried to the Lord." The cycle resumes. God wasn't completely without followers in the Dark Ages, just like he wasn't in the European Dark Ages. There were still people in that time who followed God, even though it was the Dark Ages. Same thing here. It was usually these judges or it was some prophets, and they would keep calling the people back to Yahweh. It's probably why they knew where to turn when they got into trouble. And in this time, he had a prophetess named Deborah. Now, this may seem unexpected to some, but, God often had prophetesses, which is a female prophet, right? As well as prophets in the Bible. He had both. Miriam, Moses' sister, is called a prophet in Exodus 15:20. Huldah is called one in 2 Kings 22:14. Isaiah's wife is called a prophetess in Isaiah 8:3. There's one named Noadiah in Nehemiah 6:14. And we think of the Christmas story, we think of Anna, who stayed in the temple, Luke 2:36. Philip in the early church had 4 daughters that were called prophetesses in Acts 21:19. Those are all specifically called prophetesses. This was Deborah's calling. Her calling was to deliver the messages from God to the people. There were, if you could put that next slide up, guys, there were 3 different offices in God's government in the Old Testament: prophet, king, and priest. Each one of these was anointed to serve in their capacity. Each one of them had their own swim lane that they were to stay in, and they were to do the function God had given them in that one. Now, in this day, there was no king in the days of the judges, but once there is, you will see this three-branch government operating all the time. In Saul's day, Saul, who was the first king of Israel, you had Saul as king, you had Samuel as prophet, and you had Abijah as priest. And they each had their function. In David's day, David was king, Nathan was prophet, and Abiathar was priest. These three made up the basic government of Israel. The king was the executive branch. He was to lead Israel. He did king stuff. Whatever kings do. We're not very familiar with that here in the United States, are we? There was no king in Deborah's day, so God had her tell Barak to take up the role and lead Israel to freedom. Now, one error the kings often made was that they liked to swim in the other lanes, and so they would cross over the swim lanes. They might start acting like they were the prophet or they were the priest, and they would get in trouble for that. Saul did this. Uzziah, who was a good king, he did that. So did his son Ahaz. And they all got in big trouble for getting out of their swim lane. If you're the king, that's your job. If you're the prophet, that's your job. If you're the priest, that's your job. The job of the king was to make those kind of decisions and to lead the people. The job of the prophet was to tell the people what God was saying to them. The job of the priest was to go to God on behalf of the people and make the sacrifices and make the worship and to pray for people. The people of Israel, and to make that intercession. Interestingly, there is an intersection of these three offices, and there will be one man in all of history who can fulfill all three of these, and that is who? Jesus. Jesus is the only man who can be prophet, priest, and king. Everything in all of this word points to Jesus. Again and again and again. He is the anointed one. He is the only one who is allowed to claim all three offices for himself. Deborah the prophetess calls Barak and she says, "Behold, the Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, go and march to Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali, from the sons of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera to you, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the river Kishon, and I will give them into your hand." So she calls him over and she says, "This is what God's telling you. I want you to go." You can put the map up there, guys. I want you to see how strategic this was, because you see that mountain that I put in there. That's Mount Tabor. That's about where it sits. There's two major trade routes that go through Israel. One is the King's Highway. One is the Via Mar. And right between those two, there's a valley called Jezreel that unites three continents on the earth. And it is a major traffic way for them to go through. So there's no accident. There's nothing incidental in God's instructions. You go to Mount Tabor. That is the high point there, 1,800 feet above sea level. And you were looking down over that whole valley, and you can control the whole thing. We know that kings did it over and over. Solomon built fortresses there just to protect that. We saw his horse stalls there. I know that even Ahab did at one point, built fortresses there. And God is telling Barak, I want you to go and take this high ground, and I will bring Sisera out to you. He is to take charge of an army, gather 10,000 soldiers together, and go up against Sisera and his 900 chariots, think tanks, and he thinks, no thanks. I don't want to go. Well, he doesn't flat out say no, does he? What he really says to Deborah is, are you going with me? Because if you're not going, I'm not going. I'm not going to do this thing if you're not there with me. Now, we beat him up for that pretty good, and rightly so, honestly. And actually, so does Deborah, if you look at verse 9, because she says to him, the honor shall not be yours on the journey which you are about to take. She says, I'll go with you, but then you're going to lose all the honor for this. I will go. Everybody's going to, when they're preaching about me in 2026 in Grand Haven, Michigan, they're going to talk about Deborah. They're not going to talk about Barak, because you wouldn't go. On the journey that you are taking, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. She actually didn't mean herself there, and we'll see that. But Barak is not the only hesitant person that God called to do something great, was he? We talked about Moses. And he really didn't say no, but he only said, if you won't go with me, I won't. There was a point where God told Moses, I'm not going into Canaan with you. And Moses said, well, if you're not going, I'm not going. And we actually praise Moses for that one, right? We think, okay, that was a good move, Moses. He wouldn't go ahead without God. But in this case, the context bears out that it was not the right decision for Barak to say, I'm not going if you won't go. He didn't say, unless the Lord's with me. He said, if you, Deborah, will not go with me, I'm not going. This is where it stands in such contrast to Caleb we saw last week, who was like, let me at them. They're only giants. The most they can do is kill me. I'll take them. He said, well, Deborah, if you're not going, I'm not going. So maybe this relates more closely to us who might look and say, but 900 iron chariots? Really? God, is that am I really hearing you, God? Is that really what you want me to do? I mean, Hittite technology, shepherds and farmers. Are you sure we're not being presumptuous here? So maybe it relates to us a little more. This is probably for the guys whose faith doesn't measure up to Caleb's, which would probably be us, in honesty. Barak goes with Deborah by his side, and Israel is victorious. Not a lot of detail is given. You probably get more detail reading the song in chapter 5 about it. It's kind of funny. I think it's like a Disney cartoon or something, because they fight this war, and then Deborah breaks out in song. So it's a musical. Deborah, the musical. Chapter 5, verse 20, about all it tells us about the battle is this: the stars fought from heaven, from their courses they fought against Sisera. Often the stars are equated to representing angels in the Bible, so it's likely maybe God sent angels to fight on their behalf. It also talks about the river Kishon there overflowing and flooding, which probably stopped the chariots, but it doesn't give us a whole lot of detail. It's likely one of those miracles we talked about last week where God augments people's abilities and grants them success and favor in what they're doing. And they went and fought, and they won the battle. Sisera runs from the field of battle, and he runs to the house of a man who is not an Israelite. This is an interesting turn, too. He is a relative of Moses' father-in-law and is a Gentile migrant living in Israel at the time of the judges. His name is Heber. Sisera, being a foreigner himself, likely thought he would find a refuge there with this migrant from wherever they were. They were goat herders. In fact, JL means goat. It sounds so pretty until you say it means goat, but, maybe they thought she was pretty. She's a pretty goat. But her name is JL, and he came to Heber's tent, and she sheltered him, and she gave him some food, gave him some milk to drink. Maybe that made him a little drowsy. But when he fell asleep, well, I'll just read it to you so you don't think I'm being too gross. We read it earlier, verse 21. But Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and seized a hammer in her hand and went in secretly to him and drove the peg into his temple, and it went through into the ground. She nailed his head to the ground. And he died, shockingly. Then, when Barak caught up, as he was chasing Sisera, he caught up, and she said, "Here you go. Here you go." The glory went to a woman. It didn't go to Deborah, like you would think she was saying. Deborah didn't say the glory is going to me. She says going to a woman, and here she was. Not only a woman, but not a Hebrew woman. A foreigner in your land. Like I said, it's kind of ladies' day today. And that is why it is said, I said the story really revolves around all three of these people. The people were again free from oppression, for a while anyway, as the cycle goes. Now here's the key takeaways from this passage, from this story. Number one, God calls less than perfect people to be a part of his perfect plan. God calls less than perfect people to be a part of his perfect plan. This result in the end is exactly what God wanted. It is exactly what he planned, and he worked it through imperfect people. Like I said, Barak does not measure up to Caleb, does he? In no way. Well, let me ask you this. Do we measure up to Caleb? Every time God gives us a challenge, are we like, yes, I'll go and take it? Or we're like, well, God, maybe I should pray about this first. Sometimes it can be a lack of faith and trust where we don't measure up like Barak did sometimes. And I've seen some very imperfect people who've done some very great things for God who then fall into some kind of sin or something like that. Lisa and I were just listening to an article about one who did just recently, and you hear these things and it is so terrible, but it does. Here's the thing I want you to remember. When that happens, it doesn't negate everything God did through them. It doesn't negate what God did through them. It doesn't make it okay that they fall. We're not saying that, and we should just wink at it and let it go. Or if we fall short in our faith, because that's just a fact, but it doesn't negate what God did at that time. We are what God has chosen to work with.
That's right. That's right.
And He chooses to do His work through us. And there's a saying I like to repeat when I see people going through this thing, things like this, and it is this: the best of men are men at best. The best of men, and it's true of women too, right? The best of women are women at best. The best of men are men at best. We are what we are, and God chooses to use us in spite of us. God is able to take even people who are imperfect and work His perfect plan through them. And He does it in spite of us, not because of us. Number 2, there is something lost when we fall short, though. That's why we don't take it lightly. There is something lost when God tells us, go do this, and we say, but no. When we shrink back from following God fully, kind of the opposite of what Caleb did last week, we miss out on some of the blessings. The good news is we don't thwart God's plan. But we ourselves miss out. When Moses was standing there arguing with God, the reluctant leader, right? And he said, God, I can't speak well. He's at the bush. He's arguing with a bush. And he's saying, I can't speak well. And God, I stutter. And I can't go to talk to Pharaoh. Look at me. I'm a has-been. I've been out in the desert for 40 years. God, I can't do this. And he argues back and forth with God. And God finally says, fine. Look over there. Here comes Aaron, your brother. I'll let him do the talking. Moses lost out some. Turn with me to the book of Esther, chapter 4, verse 13. We'll come to this story later, but I'll tell you there was a plot to kill all the Jews in Persia at this time. A man named Mordecai had a niece who got taken up into the palace because she was so beautiful, and God used her pretty face to get her in before the king. And Mordecai is saying, hey, you need to go talk to the king so that all our people don't get killed. And she's saying, if I go in there uninvited, I'm going to get killed. This is her uncle Mordecai's response to her. Esther 4:13. So you're going to get this twice in this series. It says, then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther. She had sent him a note. Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all of the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. God's still going to work his plan. He's still going to save Israel. He's still going to save the Jews. It'll rise from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. If you don't do this, you're the one that's going to lose out. Then he says this is wonderful too, and who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. But he's telling her, Esther, God is going to work his plan. You can be a part of it, or you can be apart from it. And if you're apart from it, you're going to miss out. God's plan will be done. We might miss out because of hesitation, and we don't want to do that. God may use someone else and let us keep watching from the sidelines. I don't know if you've heard of the children's books, the Chronicles of Narnia, but there's one of the books, Prince Caspian, where the Pevensie children are looking for Prince Caspian, and they're being led down this trail, and all the children are deciding to go down this one, and it just really rang true with this principle here, because the 4 Pevensie children are traveling back through Narnia, trying to reach Prince Caspian before his small army is overrun, and they're trying to warn him in this battle. And Lucy, the youngest, is the only one who can see Aslan, who represents Jesus in these stories. And she sees him standing up on a ridge up here, telling her, come up here, but she's the only one who can see him. And she starts to say, we need to go up there, but the others can't see him, so they know we have to go this way, and she gives in and lets him go this way. And things get really bad. Later on, she meets Aslan face to face, and she says, what would have happened if I followed you? And here's the part that really stuck with me, because he said, we can't ask what might have been. All we can do is obey and ask what will be. Whatever would have been had she trusted him and followed him when everyone else said no was gone. We will miss out when we fall short. Number 3, here's the good news. All is not lost when we fall short. We lose some, but all is not short. Or you've probably heard me say this. I almost put the point in this way because I always do. There is always, how long have I been with you? Grace, my wife. There is always grace. There is always grace. All is not lost when we fall short, so take heart. In both cases, Moses, and especially in the case of Barak, God didn't just discard them or cast aside the reluctant person. Psalm 103, verses 13 and 14 tells us this about God. It says, just as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him, even when they fall short. For he himself knows our frame. He is mindful that we are but dust. He knows. Here's something interesting. Turn with me to Hebrews 11:32. This is the last time I'll have you turn. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32. We call Hebrews 11 the what chapter? The faith chapter. Yes, it is the hall of fame, the hall of faith for the people of God throughout the Bible. And all these heroes of the faith are listed here. And here's the surprising thing. If you look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32, the author writes this, and what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell you of Gideon. And who's next? Barak. Samson, Jephthah, David and Samuel and the prophets. Barak is the one listed in the story. Next to David and Samuel. That's pretty good company. Because, see, God still used him in spite of himself. And he can with us as well. That's the good news. It's best to be like Caleb, right? It's best. God says take the mountain, you take the mountain. That's what you do. But at least I know, and I can know that if I do mess up or I disappoint the Father, I have a Father in heaven who knows me and forgives me and doesn't cast me aside just because I don't measure up. And he works his perfect will anyway. His perfect plan will always, has always, and will always go forward perfectly. The question is, will we be a part of it as imperfect as we are?